Okay, so I just got done recording this video and I went back to record a little intro to give you a little warning. This is like one of my most rambling videos I've recorded so far. I just wanted to talk about the X-T4. So anyways, there's a long rambling video about the X-T4. So I've had my X-T4 for about a couple months now, and although this isn't going to be a complete review, I just wanted to talk about it and give some thoughts on the X-T4 so far. I may do a full review at some point, but I rarely get these cameras. Actually, I don't think I've ever got a camera on the day of its release. I have bought some cameras new. I bought this one new, but I bought it a couple months ago when it had been out over a year and a half. But I do like these follow-up videos, or these videos about these cameras that have been around a while. If you Google videos for the X-T4, you'll find a ton of reviews, but reviews that were done around the time it was released, the first couple months of its lifespan. And that's still helpful. Those are still helpful, but I think videos about cameras months or years after they've been around are almost more helpful to many people. I know that a lot of you, like me, aren't able to get cameras the day they're announced, or the weeks or months that they're brand new. Now, having a camera only a couple months doesn't give me the experience I would like to have to do a really in-depth review, but considering that I've owned the X-T1, the X-T2, the X-H1, and a handful of the other X-series cameras, I can kind of pull from my experience using those, combined with my experience with the X-T4 so far. And like I said, this isn't a complete review. I just wanted to talk about the X-T4 a little bit. On a side note, I don't know if I'll do a video about it, but this is the new camera bag I got from Mega Gear with my own money. They didn't send it to me for review or anything. I still may do a review on it because although I've only had it for a very short time, I'm really, really impressed. It's a really well-made bag. But I have the silver X-T4. Obviously, they come in black and silver, all black, or this model with the silver and black combo. When I really analyze all my photos I've taken since late 2018 or early 2019, let's say the last 3 years, if I analyze all my street photos, city and street photos for the last 3 years, even other family candid photos and whatnot, the majority of them were taken with the X-T2, X-H1, and X-T1, and maybe even more of the X-T1 than any of the others. Partly because I think I own the X-T1 a little longer than I own the X-T2. But my point with all that is, when I analyze how I shoot, I realize that I've been more drawn to the X-T1, X-T2, and X-T4 type cameras. I haven't tried the X-T3, so I can't put that in the group right now. But I've been more drawn to those cameras than any other Fujifilm camera, and obviously any other brand of camera that I've owned. For whatever reason, those just fit me, and I am more motivated to shoot with them. When I'm out shooting on the street, they feel more comfortable to me. Everything about them just fits me. Even though each generation changes just slightly, they all have a connective thread, and they all have a lot of the same positives about them. And although the X-H1 up until this point was probably the most important camera I've ever owned, in terms of it gets everything I need to get done on the video side, and it checks all my boxes that I need on the street photography side. I think I still have preferred that XT line of form factor for my street photos just a little bit more. I don't have a problem with the X-H1. It's still one of my favorite cameras I've ever owned. But as I'm shooting with the X-T4 and thinking back to my X-T1 and X-T2 days, I'm realizing that this just really feels right. It fits just well in my hand for me, and when I'm shooting, I just really enjoy the ergonomics of it and the weight of it and all that stuff. Now, when the X-T4 was announced, I'm sure one of the first things everyone noticed, good or bad, was the flip-out screen that was more similar to some of the Panasonic mirrorless cameras, some of the Canon mirrorless cameras, and so on. This was the first in the Pro line of Fuji cameras that had the flip out screen. The X-T100 and X-T200 technically had a flip out screen, but I'm not really going to count those in this group. This is the first one in this line, and then the XS10 followed up with a flip out screen as well. But when people saw that flip out screen, you either were really, really mad that they replaced the tilting screen with it, or you were excited about that new possibility of having that screen. I was a little on the fence, to be honest. I have a good history with the flip out screen because I had a Canon T4i, then a Canon 70D. Both have similar flip screens that you can do selfies or record videos with and whatnot. So I was used to that kind of screen, or at least I used to be used to it. But I have gotten more accustomed to the traditional Fujifilm tilting screen. But I'm pretty adaptable, and this screen really hasn't held me back at all. And so far, I've actually come to like it, and I actually might make a separate video on that screen and why it's actually beneficial to me with my street photography. But I think that screen was one of the most important things I wanted to start off with, because it's one of the biggest reasons people avoid buying this camera or consider buying this camera, along with the price. Obviously, it's priced significantly higher right now than the X-T3, X-T30, and so on. But I would say keep an open mind about the flip screen. And like I said, I'll do a separate video just dedicated to the screen that's a little shorter that will explain some of the benefits. But the other aspects of the camera that I really like are stuff that I expected, because I have used the X-T2 and so on. The shutter dial feels very similar to the X-T2, similar to the X-H1, although I think the tension on the two different dials are slightly different, but very similar. The ISO dial is similar to the X-T2. The X-T1, if you ever used the X-T1, the X-T1 had the button to unlock it instead of the button to lock it. So you had to press the button to turn it. And since the X-T2, they've changed that. So obviously, if you've used any of the previous X-T cameras, starting with the X-T2, X-T3, a lot of that stuff's going to be the same. And I expected that. I already knew I liked that stuff. So there's a lot about this camera that I expected, and I knew were going to be positives because of my experience with the Fuji lineup and my experience with other cameras, like knowing that I could work with the flip out screen. I knew some of the benefits, knowing that because of some of the Fuji cameras, I liked the dials and stuff like that. That stuff I knew what to expect. I knew there were going to be benefits. Let me talk about a couple things that were some pleasant surprises. In terms of ergonomics, meaning the grip and the weight and how it feels in the hand, to me this is about a perfect weight for a camera, and it feels really, really compact and well built. Almost more solid than my X-H1, and I can't exactly explain why, but it just definitely feels like a really, really solid camera and a well-built camera. The grip and the thickness of it aren't as large as you would expect. I feel like the pictures almost are a little deceiving. It's big enough that it does make a difference, and it's noticeably bigger than the X-T2, but it's still not as big as the X-H1 in a good way, because sometimes I don't want that big of a grip. Sometimes I want a perfect balance of sleek design, but yet something to hold on to, and it has that. So it has the nice grip on the front and still has a little bit of the thumb catch on the back. So it has a perfect spot to grip and hold on to. So very, very easy to hold and shoot in that regard. So the weight was a little bit of a surprise. How the weight and thickness was a positive surprise, and how I liked that and how much I liked that. Another surprise in terms of design and usability is the placement of this function button on top. I mean, obviously I could look at pictures and I could see where it was placed, but I didn't realize how much I like having it there as opposed to on the X-T2 right in between those buttons. And I found the X-T2 was kind of difficult for me to click that function button efficiently. So having that function button right there has been really, really handy. I'm still figuring out my preferred custom button layout over the years with my X-T2, X-H1, I've just bounced around, and sometimes I'll have something, one thing assigned to the front custom button, and then the next week I'll change it and it'll be something else. And the same with the rear buttons. So I'm still trying to figure out my perfect button customization, but the fact that it does have all the custom buttons and they're all really, really accessible is really nice and convenient. But that button placement was a surprise, something I didn't think I'd like that much, or care about that much, I should say. They switched the quick button menu and the auto exposure lock button, and I like this setup. This actually makes more sense to me, because obviously the autofocus on button is bigger and that's nicer, and the placement is perfect. The placement on this is more similar to what I'm used to on my XH1. And the auto exposure lock button is a little easier for my thumb to get to. So if I'm doing aperture priority, it's a little more natural for me to press it right there than to press it over here. As for most of the time where my thumb is at, that's a little bit more of it's a larger movement for my thumb to get to. So I actually like that. That was a small surprise that I liked about this camera. Surprises in terms of image quality, video quality, and all that, I would say one of the biggest surprises was how good the black and whites look straight out of camera, and how I'm able to take my black and white JPEGs, and sometimes I'll tweak them a little bit, but other times I've been printing them almost exactly as they are. I don't always do that because I do like to work with the raw files. And then I'm using Capture One a lot more. Capture One, I think, does a really, really fantastic job with these Fuji raw files. Then I do a little bit of tweaking to finish it off and print it. Like I said, the JPEGs have always looked amazing, but I am a little surprised at how good they look. Now I'm going back and forth between my XH1 and X-T4 to make sure that this isn't just a new camera type thing, or it's just I'm really excited because it's a new thing, and I want to make sure that I'm actually seeing some huge quality difference. Now maybe it's not as drastic of a difference as I first thought, but there's still a good difference between the black and white JPEGs out of this and the other cameras I've tried so far. Another interesting feature, which doesn't get a lot of conversation on YouTube, is that along with converting your raw files to JPEGs in camera, so if you shot a photo with one recipe, but then you want to see what it looks like in another recipe, for a while you've been able to convert that in camera and get another JPEG of that same image. You've been able to do that for quite a few cameras back. The difference now with the X-T4 is that not only can you convert a raw image in camera to a JPEG, but you can convert it to a TIFF file as well. And I searched on Fuji's website, and as far as I can tell, this is the only camera as of today that has that feature. Now, I've not used it all the time, and I've only tried it a few times, but that's kind of nice to know that you can kick out a higher quality image, a bigger file than even a JPEG, but yet that's not a raw image. So you can take your raw image, you can have a Fujifilm film simulation recipe programmed into your camera, and then convert your raw file with that recipe to a TIFF file. And now you have a TIFF file that has that recipe built into that image, but the TIFF file is a larger file, has more data. Traditionally, and this isn't completely true across the board, but traditionally a file like that might have some more flexibility when editing than a JPEG does. Like I said, that's just a rule of thumb. It's not consistent with every single use case. But that TIFF conversion was a huge surprise. I didn't even really think about it. I think I saw some listing about a TIFF compatibility or something in the specs of the X-T4, but didn't really research what that was about until I got the camera and played around with it. So in a way, like this could be a dark room in a way. You could shoot your raw files, put in a recipe, convert the raw file to a TIFF, and then save all your TIFF files somewhere or print them off, just like you do your JPEGs, of course. For the last 2 years or so, the X-H1 has been my main camera. Even though I've had cameras come in and out of my kit, the X-H1 has been consistent for the past 2 years. My main video camera, I've shot a lot of street photography with it and other things. At the end of last year, I wanted to trim down my camera gear, trim down my collection of cameras, collection of lenses and whatnot, and really focus more on shooting and focus more on projects in 2022. But because this YouTube channel is important to me and I do want to create video projects, the video aspect of these cameras is important to me. My X-H1 has been my main camera for the most part for the past 2 years, regardless of the cameras that have come in and out. The X-H1 has been consistent the past couple of years for video, for street photography, and other forms of shooting. But since it's also the video camera I use to shoot my YouTube videos with, I figured it'd be nice to have something else to shoot street photography with. And yeah, it would be an added benefit if I could rotate equally and shoot photos and video on both cameras. So I looked at a few different things and done some research on getting a used X-T3 or some other things. But once I added all my used gear up, I was able to pull the trigger on the X-T4. That video aspect of the X-T4 was really, really enticing, and I knew that could be the X-T4 could be my only video camera if I needed it to be. But then I started shooting with it on the street, shooting street photography, and I remembered how much I love this form factor. I remembered how much I loved the X-T2, and to a certain extent, as far as the street photography part of this, I think I may like shooting the X-T2, X-T3, X-T4 better than the X-H1 for street photography. I'm still kind of figuring this all out because maybe it's just going to be a thing where I just rotate between the two. But as of right now, the X-T4 has been a really, really solid hybrid camera. I've been shooting with my YouTube videos with it. It's easier to shoot my YouTube videos with it because the autofocus is so solid. I don't have to pre-focus. Most of the time with my X-H1, I do a pre-focus, and that way I'm not worrying about the autofocus hunting back and forth. But with X-T4, the autofocus is so good that I can just keep the autofocus on, and it does a really good job of following me. But I enjoy shooting street photography with it so much that it's been the camera I have been using most. And that may not be the same case for you. I think the flip out screen could be a deal breaker. I know it's not for everyone. For me, it hasn't been a big deal, and actually I have enjoyed the benefits of it. The other thing shouldn't be a huge surprise. If you've used the X-T1, X-T2, X-T3, you're going to feel some familiar things. It's going to feel at home to a certain extent, especially with the X-T2 and X-T3. Yes, it feels thicker, but after you use it for a while, you kind of forget the differences in thickness and weight between this and the X-T2 and X-T3. If you have them next to each other, I'm sure you would be able to notice a difference. But if you're just using this one and don't have a way to compare, the weight and thickness is really not a big deal. And it's actually kind of an advantage to me. I kind of like feeling a substantial, camera, but yet not too huge. That's kind of the perfect balance that this one has. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with all the Fujifilm cameras released up until this point. What happens to them when they announce this next generation of cameras? Because it does, all signs point to a really, really huge shift and a really big advancement in their camera lineup. And maybe it won't be as big as I suspect, but I have a feeling there's going to be some massive differences. I think there's going to be some connective elements. Like I think there's going to be an X-T5. I would almost guarantee it. We know there's going to be an X-H2, but there may not be an X-T30 or an X-T40, or I should say, there may be some other cameras that go to the wayside, or maybe they combine some of their other cameras. We don't know for sure. But the X-T4 for me right now is going to be my favorite. It's my favorite street photography camera, although I still will use my X-H1 for street photography as long as I have that. For video, I can go between the two relatively easy. If I need autofocus, this is the one I'll turn to. The better codec support and the 10-bit output and all that stuff is really handy on this, but they both do solid video, so I'll use both for video. And like I said, for street photography, this is my preferred one for right now. we'll see what happens. We'll see if I'm able to pick up an X-T30 Mark II. I would kind of like to try that one for some street photos. But this is an extremely all over the place rambling video. I just wanted to talk about this camera. It turned out to be a little bit more of a review than I wanted it to be, but I don't really talk about the negatives, much like I didn't talk about the negatives of my XH1. Part of the not talking about the negatives on this one is there was nothing hiding to me in the specs. Like I knew what to expect. Any negatives would be comparing it to other brands or other camera models or other camera styles from other brands, which I already knew those differences. So I wasn't expecting anything that wasn't going to be there. So to me, there was no negatives. I knew exactly what to expect. The screen was going to be just something that was different, something I was confident I could get used to, and I have. So that's why there's really no negatives in this video. And it turned out to be a long rambling video. If you're still here, thank you. But I just want to talk about the X-T4 and how it kind of reminded me how much I love this form factor. And now I want to keep shooting street photography with it and see what else I can create with it. And the video stuff will be something I will utilize as well, of course. I will try to do do a full review that's a little more organized, something that's a little more easier for people to navigate through with some better chapter markers. I don't know how I'm going to do chapter markers in this video, for instance. But do you have any questions on the X-T4? Do you have any questions on how I use some of this stuff or what settings I have? Let me know. I will have recipes for this camera starting soon. I'm working on a few. And yeah, I guess that's it for now. Just want to talk about the X-T4. Thanks again, as always, for watching. You guys are amazing. I'll talk to you soon.